Hello and welcome to the Miko Bits show, and I'm your host, Miko Bits. Today we have Grahan Novak from ConstitutionDAO. So, it's really amazing. I think he'll have a lot more details for you, but, it is one of these amazing kind of flash DAOs, which has sort of had a really exciting purpose, which is to buy one of the original copies of the United States Constitution. So, I'd love to kind of get more details, but, this is a lot of fun. And I think, would love to kind of talk about that project as well as the future of the DAO coordination and collaboration space. So, Graham, welcome to the Miko Bits show.
Thank you, Miko. I really appreciate you having me on, and it's fun and exciting to be able to share the story about ConstitutionDAO. It's been a really, really fun, crazy journey.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, it really came together incredibly quickly. So I guess, would love to kind of, first of all, just have you tell the audience a bit about the DAO, and then, then I think we should just jump right into the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you outlined, the premise of the DAO was to collectively gather many people across the internet, across Web3, fundraise an incredible amount of Ethereum in a very short period of time, actually enter into an auction in New York at the Sotheby's auction, where there is one of the original 11 copies of the U.S. Constitution from the Constitutional Convention. And we, in the course of 1 week, put this together and actually made it to the auction.
That is truly amazing. So it must have been an amazing week. And I guess my big question to start with is sort of like, how did this idea surface? Like, how did this become a thing?
Yeah, so there'd been a Reuters article that had come out in October, and the way I had first personally come across it, there's a group of my friends from college. None of them are crypto or tech native, and it was in the auction house space, and just jokingly posted a link to it. At the same time, I was reading that article. I happened to be doing some reading on Flamingo DAO and some of the new things that they were up to, and just kind of had this idea in my head about DAOs, purchasing, acquisitions, and there started being this interesting thought crossover between, why is it that we don't do so much of this in the physical world? We can do it for NFTs and digital assets, but why not real world assets? And there's also something specifically special about the Constitution, in that it's like the original document of decentralization, right? It's this tool and this device that has this interesting story that I think really resonates with a lot of people in the crypto Web3 world, that what we're building in Web3 is a series of decentralized protocols to decentralize our communication and operations and business and organization. And the Constitution was this document that at the time was wildly entrepreneurial and radical. And people thought this was, people call it the Great American Experiment for a reason. People were leaving this monarchy and saying, let's transition over to this system, this crazy thing that has 3 branches of government and how they have checks and balances for each other. In the same way that I think a lot of us think about, new protocols, and how is it that we think about layering on a base layer and, having a multi-chain world or interacting with L2s. And we're all experimenting and trying out these new products and protocols. So I think that from a very fundamental perspective, there's just kind of this interesting philosophical understanding that people in the crypto world were just saying, wow, this really resonates with people.
Yeah, one of the quotes that I enjoy in the crypto space is Meta Kovan, who's the buyer of the $69 million Beeple art as an NFT. He said that crypto is the new America, right? So, I think that's a nice quote, and it's a quote that kind of helps to illustrate this idea around things like freedom, right? So I think there's a lot of things to do with that. So what I'd love for you to do is sort of dig in a little further to kind of how did this, I understand there's a team of people, or how did this become such a thing in such a short amount of time?
Yeah. So from my lens, I had reached out to a good friend of mine, Austin Kane, and we immediately I'd said, hey, I've got a crazy idea for you. And we immediately started reaching out to other folks. We'd kind of said, oh, we could probably do this with Party DAO, and kind of quickly did some ideating. And then said, all right, let's reach out to folks. And so he was reaching out to people like Julian Weiser and Miguel Piedrafita, and then I was reaching out to people like Packy McCormick and many, many other people. And we started kind of cross-pollinating the space. And over a very short period of time, I think we'd start hitting people from 2 and 3 angles. And a lot of folks that we'd reached out to were also talking to other people. There's a group called Gas Station who got very involved very early on. And I guess a lot of their folks were very interested in this concept as well. And so we'd just been telling everybody, hey, kickoff call, 8 p.m. And so at 8 p.m., we had this kind of mishmash, hodgepodge group of 15 or so individuals. I kind of gave this kind of kickoff thought as to how we were kind of perceiving this and what we thought we needed to do moving forward. And then over a very, very short period of time, the objective was clear. We're going to enter the auction to purchase the Constitution. And after that, we just began mobilizing and operationalizing right away. Even before the 8 o'clock kickoff call, though, we'd already been reaching out to Sotheby's. We'd already start, talking to more folks about, hey, who could be potential donors here, building a donor list. So it really was getting operationalized from the very inception. And we knew that this was a race against the clock, though. From that kickoff call at 8 p.m. on November 11th, we had less than 7 days, less than 1 week until the November 18th auction. And so there's something actually I think really cool. And people in the crypto world love trying to do the impossible. Whenever someone says, oh, it's going to be too short of a timeline, that's a challenge. We'll take you up on that. And I think something that was really cool was within the first day or two, I think we probably got 6 or 7 different comments from folks connected to the art world, the fundraising world, all these different places saying there's no way you're going to be able to create a legal structure. Sotheby's takes weeks to approve new buyers, and they're not going to interact with the DAO and things like that. So we just took it as a challenge and said, we're really doubling down on it. So in this initial kickoff call, this group of people just very quickly said, all right, we're going to launch a Discord. We're going to start launching the Twitter campaign. We're going to start having conversations around funding mechanisms very quickly. So all this started just transpiring incredibly, incredibly rapidly. And we knew that, from the onset, just based off of our kind of small sample size, based off of initial outreach, that this had, the potential for virality. Early on, a couple of the folks that we'd reached out to, Julian and Dame, both of them had made tweets about it that started picking up a fair bit of traction already. And it kind of, as from like a marketing stunt perspective, that you have to reach this certain type of, virality coefficient on an idea that's just radical and crazy enough that someone wants to share it with their friends. They want to push it on to the next person. And I think that we knew that there was also a headline that was, worthy of someone saying, what the heck do you mean you're going to buy the Constitution? I didn't know it was for sale. And, I didn't know that you could just go buy it. And also, for anyone who's not in the crypto world, what do you mean you're going to buy it with a bunch of crypto money from the internet? It's kind of how the general public was perceiving it. So it kind of had just this magic blend of aspects going into it.
Yeah, I really love this, right? Because for me, I'm very interested in sort of this emergence of this kind of blockchain and effectively kind of almost a gamer-centric transmedia culture, right? And in a sense, like what we're building is we're kind of building like a cockpit or like a shrine or like some, it's a combination of a shrine and a cockpit, right? Like the cockpit implies that like it's a driver's seat of some sort, right? But a shrine kind of implies that it's sort of more like, that it's centered around the culture of, blockchain. I also believe in kind of a gamer-centric transmedia metaverse type of thing, but in a sense, like part of what you're doing is kind of close to almost like a reality show, right? In a sense. So how do you react to this as sort of a media property?
Yeah, so there's definitely a media property aspect to it. I think if the project hadn't been as novel as it was, I'm not sure it would have garnered the same type of traction. So if you were to take the exact same concept with another very rare document, even if it had that same type of kind of emotional sentiment to it, if the second time around, it's maybe not as worthy as New York Times or Wall Street Journal or these other places. So it might not resonate with people quite in the same way. And so there was definitely this aspect of novelty to it. it's funny you mentioned this kind of aspect of like TV or media. One of our other core contributors who added an awful lot to the project, Alice Ma, she's got another DAO, and it's called Mad Realities, and it's actually media and focused in that way. So I think that's definitely was something that was on our minds, and a lot of the conversation about kind of the media strategy was how do you make it just a unique enough story. So that's definitely part of it. There's also, yes, this gamified aspect, and we see it everywhere in the world of crypto, where people want to share it with their friends, they want to spread this and make it viral. So I definitely completely agree with you there, Miko.
So I think one of the pressures in kind of the crypto Twitter sphere is kind of like this NGMI versus like WAGMI, right? So in a sense, like I would love to kind of get your perspective on this, right? Because putting this cart together, on the fly as you're going down the bumpy road, like it feels like it's probably a tale fraught with kind of both NGMI moments and WAGMI moments. So like, how would you characterize your kind of critical moments and junctures in this very fast project?
I think from the onset, we knew that it could work, but I was admittedly just like optimistically cautious. That from the onset, it was like, okay, we've got maybe a less than 5% chance of this actually working. And I kind of figured that even if we got the traction and the attention, and even if we raised the capital and got it raised into a smart contract, there's still this overhanging concern of, is Sotheby's going to get comfortable with a decentralized autonomous organization purchasing the Constitution of the United States, right? Because at the end of the day, we're still dealing with centralized organizations that have veto controls and powers and authorities. And so there was kind of always that looming question. Now, throughout the process, this was a huge roller coaster. And on some days, it felt like we're on top of the world. And of course, this was going to go through. And you had just those moments of pure bliss and excitement of, hey, we're going to make it. And I mean, the community was great at fostering that type of excitement and tension. And I'm not sure how much time you spent in our Discord server, but just absolute non-stop messages, which in some ways is a blessing. In some ways, from a perspective of communication and clarity, some ways kind of creates a little bit of a curse too, about how do you streamline what ended up being 20,000 some odd people in a server and unifying them towards one cause. Now, the team on the whole, I think, exuded a tremendous amount of confidence and very much so fell into the GMI camp. I'd say in tiny blips in between, there was kind of just those moments of self-doubt, but you expect that along the way. The thing that was, I think, fortunate was because it was 1 week, everyone just kind of dropped everything and said, this is cool, this is worth working on, and whether or not we make it, we're going to give this our absolute best effort, and we're going to leave everything out there.
I think one of the fascinating things about your framing, when you think about it philosophically, is that one of the things that's very deep rooted within the world of blockchain are really ideas around freedom, right? And I think you kind of have a range of ideas, right? Like I think one of the things that emerges out of the culture of Bitcoin is kind of this idea of individual freedom, right? And in a sense, there's a lot of kind of libertarian philosophy, the philosophies of sound money, Austrian economics, which is sort of like capitalism, so there's a lot of really interesting, because if you think about the inception of Austrian economics, it's sort of very post-World War II, and so there's kind of a very interesting kind of a counterpoint to these kind of like more kind of, it's really a rebuttal to Marxism, right? So in a sense, like Austrian economics is very embedded within the culture of Bitcoin, right? So I guess the other thing that's so interesting, though, is that the opposite, individual freedom, is kind of like, I do whatever I want, right? And in a sense, there's probably some amount of that goes into, we're going to buy this thing, right? Like there's a certain amount of like liberation of individuals where it's like, I'm buying the Constitution and there's nothing you can do about it, right? Whereas the other side of freedom is kind of like, we make the rules. And I think what's so interesting about that end of freedom is that that's really what's enshrined in the Constitution, right? That the Constitution is, we make the rules. And by the way, here's how we make them, right? Like the Constitution literally documents like the mechanisms that are used to create the rules that, we live under in this country. So I guess I'm curious about your perspective on sort of freedom.
Yeah, I think in some ways the kind of beautiful metaphor is being able to take what was created by the framers and kind of taking this extension of it and saying, hey, how do you take this concept of decentralization and take it to a different level? And in the Web3 world, the phrase that people use fairly ubiquitously is, instead of don't be evil, it's can't be evil. How is it that we can start creating, mechanisms to programmatically say we have to follow these certain type of codified laws, and you don't have the ability to have bad actors who just choose to go against what has been written and mutually agreed upon by social contract. Because at the end of the day, that's what the Constitution is and has been, is a social construct that all of us have in the United States mutually agreed upon. If you go against something in that, it's only reinforced so long as the rest of the people in that system kind of adhere to it. The cool part about layering in the software and technology and digitized governance on chain is you don't have an option but to follow that. And of course, there's loopholes in contracts, and there's possibilities for flaws, and the ability to have not foreseen some circumstances. But at the end of the day, the smart contract functions exactly as programmed, and there's something kind of beautiful to that. So it's definitely a little bit of an extension of that framework. When we're talking about kind of this aspect of like personal liberties and personal freedoms, yeah, there's this kind of cool aspect too of like, hey, this is true. Kind of, in some ways, what we did was a bit of a performative art, a social speech, kind of this concept of saying, hey, we as a group are going to choose to do this, and if we are shot down, whether that's because of laws and legalities of groups that say that we're not permitted to, or if we're shot down because some centralized force or centralized buyer of some sort says, no, we're going to outbid you, there's still this type of conversation that then gets brought up, and no matter what, it's progressed to conversation, has brought Web3 to the front of conversation, has brought conversations about who should own a document like that up to forefront of conversation, things like that as well. And I think philosophically, it is curious that while there's so many Austrian economic ideas, and there's also these concept of free markets and being able to build very neat things in that way. There's also this idea of, hey, we the people are going to go together and together have governance of this document and share this document. So it actually mixes, I think, a lot of other ideologies. And when you spoke to individual contributors, I mean, it was the motivations were all across the board.
Well, I want to hear this.
Oh, absolutely. Did you? I don't know if you had a chance to, by chance, read some of the contribution notes. So when someone contributed money into the Juicebox contract, they had the ability to leave a note, puts it on chain, and I mean, some of these notes were absolutely beyond moving. Some of the initial ones, or some of the ones that stick in my mind, was someone who said, I'm an immigrant from Seoul, and I'm now an owner of the Constitution of the United States. Or someone else who is saying, we're encouraging civic engagement and hoping for a better America in this Web3 world. So kind of in this sense, envisioning this extension of the Constitution. Some people who are just proud and patriotic. There's one particular one that resonated very strongly with me, because the Constitution is a incredibly foresightful document in thinking about decentralization, but it's also a flawed document, and people would point to things like the 3/5 compromise as being an inherent flaw built into this document. And so part of this movement and this organization actually brought a lot of these very tough conversations to head to say, hey, is this a document that we love and respect, but also have the ability to provide critique and criticism? And one of the comments that really, really, I think resonated so strong with a lot of people was one by a donor, and their message said, "We were once owned, now we are owners." A black man in America, and there's a picture of a black pride flag with a fist kind of raised in solidarity. And I'm like, that is really, really powerful. And then, like, I mean, honest to God, just gave me just absolute goosebumps. So you had people who were, proud to be Americans themselves. You had people in other countries saying, hey, I haven't had a chance to experience the freedom and democracy and joys of America and the amazing aspects and opportunities that it holds, but I love those ideals, and I feel like me holding this token allows me to have a sense of and it allows me to have governance and a sense of ownership in a way that to them was very powerful. Those stories by themselves, I think, made this entire project more than worthwhile in my mind.
Yeah, that is truly amazing. And I guess what I'd love to kind of get to is like maybe a little bit of the past and a little bit of the future, right? So, in a sense, I'd love to kind of get the audience a little bit better of a feeling of kind of like, what came before this for you, and where does this go afterwards?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first foray into crypto was in 2017. I was attempting to arbitrage Litecoin and Bitcoin on a Zimbabwean exchange called Golix before the country banned cryptocurrencies yet again. I probably should have chosen a different country. Trying to repatriate money after it had been sent over there was caused challenges, and they ended up banning it. So there's all kinds of complexities, but that was enough to whet my palate and make things really interesting. At the time, I'd probably be a self-described Bitcoin maxi. And I think my ideas kind of evolved over time. I think that particular cycle, I just witnessed so many projects that had just deep flaws, and you just saw scams and frauds left and right. And I wasn't particularly a huge fan of many of the things I was seeing in the market. And granted, I probably wasn't spending enough time looking at enough things, frankly. But at the time, that's kind of the category I fell into. And then through this next cycle, as I saw the true utility of DeFi protocols, and then a lot of the games beginning to develop and roll out, and true Web3 infrastructure having amazing user bases and getting such large traction, I went, oh my gosh, I've been missing out and have been underselling the Ethereum ecosystem, and then as Solana and so these other ecosystems popped up, they all became just incredibly fascinating to me. So I dove into it an awful lot more. So at the time in 2017, I had been running a startup in Portugal. It was a company servicing remote workers. We were building out an international network of host cities for remote capable workers. And it was actually one of my clients who had first introduced Bitcoin to me. And so fast forward 2 years, I took a job in Atlanta with a group called 28th Street Ventures. It's a billion plus investment group. And I actually kind of switched over kind of to this other side of, I'd been an entrepreneur, and I spent some time on the finance side of things, conducting diligence on leverage buyouts, SPACs, mezzanine financing, public equities. I co-manage the YG fund and played a pretty big role in our company's acquisition of Grindr in 2020. So kind of doing a lot of these kind of traditional investment kind of roles. And then, when you enter traditional finance, a lot of times people are just deeply, deeply skeptical of crypto. And so I started having conversations with them right away. Hey, here's my thesis on Bitcoin. Here's why it represents digital gold. So we kind of started going through this kind of process of informing and educating. And then as that thesis became more and more clear, we started talking about Ethereum. What does it mean to build a decentralized computer on a public ledger that's enabling smart contracts? And then we started talking about DeFi and these other things. So bit by bit, I started building out our investment platform for cryptocurrencies. And that had been just a really exciting process. And getting further and further down the rabbit hole, getting involved in Discords, and just started eating into every aspect of my life. And I think anyone who spent enough time in crypto has that same type of moment, right, where they've fallen down the rabbit hole and they find themselves waking up the weekends, the mornings and the evenings, just reading articles and talking to their friends and trying to learn more about the things that are happening. And so one thing led to another, and I was just so excited then to be able to actually launch and be a part of this cohort to build ConstitutionDAO.
So one thing I'm curious about is sort of what happens to, I think you should probably tell the story of like the conclusion of what happened to the auction, right? And then from there, I'd love to kind of have you talk a little bit about kind of the DAO going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So on actual auction night, the team, the vast majority of the team, I'd say, gathers in New York City. We weren't actually physically at Sotheby's. We were gathered at another place together to watch the auction. It was very fun being able to meet some of the folks who we'd just been eating, breathing, living ConstitutionDAO with for the last week in person. And there's just a moment of just pure gut wrenching horror when you realize, man, we've worked every possible angle, and it's not enough, and you end up losing the auction. And there was a huge, massive sense of disappointment and to a certain degree
Sure.
disbelief. The original purchase price estimated by Sotheby's was set between 15 and $20 million,
Wow.
and we ended up raising just shy of 12,000 ETH, which I think around on the day of was valued somewhere around 47 million. Now we couldn't bid the full 47 million, which caused a little bit of confusion. Our maximum bid that we backed into was about 40 million because there's auction house fees, and we also needed to reserve some money for the use and the transportation, preservation of the document itself. And very last minute too, there had been a slight change in plans. Rather than being able to just bid with ETH sitting in a wallet and then convert upon the successful purchase of the Constitution, because there'd been so much volatility in the market, I think the price of Ether declined something around 15% since the day we launched the project. And so in a lot of ways, the Ether was actually really working against us. And so Sotheby's had gotten a little bit nervous, and the day of the auction said, hey, no, you're actually going to have to convert to fiat prior to the auction, which causes some challenges. And so actually, very last minute, we had to get in touch with FTX, and FTX US was incredibly helpful. And they basically arranged for a swap at a predetermined price to say, we'll go ahead and swap this currency for USD, and then following the auction, if you guys lose, we'll swap it back at the exact same exchange rate so that you guys can return the same amount to your contributors without having to say, oh, we're actually returning more ETH or less ETH, which would have either made people mad or caused potentially taxation challenges, things like that, where it was like, okay, just be able to return the same amount would be really, really great. So we ended up losing the auction. I think people reacted to it very differently. There's a handful of us that kind of went back into a room, and as I was describing it, immediately started war rooming. All right, what's next? How are we going to rebuttal? What does this mean for us? What are our plans moving forward? And there was a number of things that started getting discussed right off the bat. Is there opportunities for other historic documents? Is there an opportunity to back museums? Is there an opportunity to reach this buyer, whoever it is? Because at the time we had no idea who it was. Is there a possibility to reach this buyer, explain to them how powerful this movement is and what it means more than just as an item, and that we've got really great plans for the document. Something that people don't really know and we didn't have a chance to really publicize is, we've been doing so much work on the back end to try to say, what are we actually going to be doing with this document? And the plan that we were really excited to be able to share with folks and present to our community and have them vote on was to actually put it in Federal Hall. Federal Hall was the original home of Congress. Before Congress moved to D.C., it was based in New York. It's where George Washington was inaugurated. It's where the Bill of Rights was passed. 17 million annual visitors go through those doors. It's managed by National Park Service. It's open to the public. And in 2026, they're having the 250th anniversary of the country, a celebration of it. And this document, governed by the people, could have been the centerpiece display of that. I think could have been really powerful. But, nonetheless, it didn't happen. So instead, we went back and we began war rooming. We had the conversations. What is it that we can do instead? What are the other opportunities available? And we had to kind of pause those conversations. So we said, first and foremost, we have to make sure that we're able to provide refunds to donors right away. And so we kind of put all of our time and energy and effort into basically making sure that we were doing it safely, securely, trying to communicate to people. Because, you and I and everyone else in this world knows that there are a lot of bad actors in crypto, and we wanted people to be able to receive their money back very quickly. And the longer that time is delayed between the auction, people start just getting nervous and uncomfortable, and they go, oh, am I going to get my money back? I'm going to get rug pulled. Is something going to happen to this? And so we were just working absolutely nonstop. Now, mind you, we're on now day 7 of pure exhaustion, sleep deprivation. The entire team, I can't thank them enough for everything that they did and the sacrifices people made to just, sacrifice their health more or less to try to make this happen. And then after we lose, asking people, hey, I know this is a lot, but we've still got work to do. And not only do we need to establish the refund mechanism, but we need to communicate what the next steps are, the next plans are. So this is where some really challenging stuff happened. So a very ideal thought that we had from the onset of the project was this. We didn't allocate any of the tokens to ourselves. In that sense, our project was very unique. The vast majority of projects, right? You allocate 20, 25, 10, some percentage of the token allocation to the core team to fund them and motivate them. We said, hey, this is a 1 week project that's going to be by the people, for the people. And this isn't, some type of money grab. This isn't us just trying to make a bunch of money. This is us trying to do something really, really amazing and have something that's in some ways very pure and whole. And so it was just, if you put in, 1% of the contributions, you're going to have 1% of the governance. And that's all there was to it. That creates a challenge, though. Then afterwards, if you say, hey, we want to go do the next thing, is that 1 week timeline, it's okay to ask people for the time and attention and energy. But afterwards, you say, okay, we're now going to pivot and do the next thing. You got people who just said, hey, I paused my work for the last week and dropped everything. I can't keep doing this because I got to get back to work, and you guys don't have an ability to compensate me. And so you had a lot of people who immediately off the bat just started, just kind of disappeared. Which I don't blame them. I really don't. In some ways, it's disheartening, but at the same time, I'm like, hey, I totally get it. I mean, everyone's got their lives to move on with.
Yes.
And so you had a very rapid deterioration. The second thing was because we had been making decisions so rapidly and trying to execute so quickly and get people their money back so quickly, we're trying to communicate really transparently. We said, hey, here's our refund mechanism. Here's how we're getting your money back. And in retrospect, we rushed that. We didn't think it through quickly enough. What happened was we said we're going to return money via a snapshot, and we're basically going to capture what you have in your wallet, and we're going to allow you to kind of opt in to the next phase of what we're doing, or take your money back. And so we were trying to do it in a very efficient fashion. After having additional conversations, we decided that this wasn't the best mechanism to do it. And we said, hey, we're actually going to return it through the juice box mechanism. That's how things were funded. So rather than doing a snapshot, it was, hey, if the funding was you put in 1 Ether and you get out 1 million tokens, you have to put back 1 million tokens and you get back 1 Ether. So a very straightforward process. But because we had messaged slightly different before, we put ourselves in a bizarre situation where you had some people who were basically were trying to get double refunds, where they had gone out onto secondary markets, sold their tokens, and then felt like we were somehow trying to be bad actors in this. And obviously that wasn't the case. And obviously we were just trying to be as clear and concise about this as possible. But all of a sudden you had these very, very small minority of people, maybe like literally just 4 or 5 of them, but very loudly and very vocally saying, oh, this was wrong, it's rug pull. And like the vast majority of people, weren't operating on secondary markets. And we'd clearly communicated to everybody, we don't support the discussion of prices, we don't support liquidity pools, we don't support secondary markets. You own your token, that's it. This is a governance token, that's it. So we weren't even having conversations about those things. But the small minority of people were saying, oh, this and that. And there was this brief group that got created to say like, oh no, we're going to try to sue you guys. And so not only are people sleep deprived, but now they aren't compensated for this. They've lost the auction, and now people are threatening them. And so you had this kind of group mentality and this just pure exhaustion going into kind of towards the Thanksgiving holidays of people just saying, oh my God, is this still worth it? And kind of through this process, the team had kind of made a tough choice, and two of the folks on our team had said, yeah, it might make the most sense for us to go ahead and just say there's only one option, which is to take your money back. If we choose to move forward, we have to try to persuade people to give us an allocation. We have to either do that or work with no actual compensation. And there was kind of all these challenges. I think in retrospect, that was a bunch of, in my opinion, and very rushed decisions that we made in the heat of the moment on a lot of exhaustion, a lot of sleep deprivation. I think there's a lot of different paths and options forward had we maybe taken a couple of steps back, but you can't regret that. And I think that the team was making the best decisions they could have at that given point in time. And so we ended up just going with the route of perhaps greatest conservativeness to say, hey, we don't want legal challenges. We're trying to do stuff well and by the book. Take your money back, take your refund. We're going to wind down the project in entirety, and that's going to be the end of it. We're just basically taking the route of kind of most conservativeness. And of course, after you announce, hey, we're winding down the project, you really can't deviate from that again. So even though after that, there was probably about 2 other additional plot points that had happened of, hey, we could do this or this could happen. After you then communicate, hey, if we're winding down the project, claim your redemption or hold your token, do whatever it is you want. After people start redeeming, if you then change courses again and say, well, actually, we're doing this other thing, people would say, well, you had me redeem my token. You guys keep changing the narrative on us. And so I think we were trying to be very cognizant to say, hey, let's stick with it with a clear, compelling story and not change that up. So we chose to do a full wind down the project. Now, the part that got really crazy is through this process, separately from us and our conversations, the people token had gotten hold in group chats and many other places. And a lot of this was being conveyed to us second and third hand through translations, but in particular, there were some group chats in China who got hold of the token. Now, the name of the token is people, as in like we the people.
Yes.
But there was this kind of tongue-in-cheek nature to some of these group chats in China who were viewing it as like, oh, this is in like the People's Republic, but not the Communist People's Republic, but this People's Republic that's actually represents freedom and democracy and liberty and the ideals of the Constitution. Moreover, they were saying, oh, not only that, but this is actually a reserve currency because there's Ethereum locked in the contract backing this. So we accidentally created a $1 billion+ meme token that started taking off because people were just saying, oh, we just want the token. So it became then impossible to get people to redeem their tokens, take their ether back. So at this point, there's still millions of dollars of ether locked in this contract and a multi-$100 million people token circulating that's probably going to be a perpetual artifact of the ecosystem unless the price of the people token dips below the reserve price of Ethereum. And it's probably just going to circulate out there indefinitely. And it's just kind of this bizarre artifact that will continue to exist.
What's your estimate? What's your estimate of the kind of like total value of ether locked currently?
I believe it's somewhere around $20 million. It's
wow. That's pretty material.
It's not insubstantial. I think that the rough ballpark was about half of the ETH had been redeemed, and then the other half of it either was claimed or unclaimed, but either way it was not redeemed. So it still exists in that system and is basically just these now floating people tokens. And based off of, I don't follow the price action super closely, but one of the points I checked most recently, I think it was still worth $500 million or something like that, which again, incredibly bizarre considering we lost the auction.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, obviously you have kind of you still kind of have a DAO around the people token, right? So like, I guess I'm wondering, like, is there any kind of like team organized around proposing, like, because obviously, like, with the DAO you have this idea of governance, right? So obviously governance relates to improvement. So is there anyone proposing improvement on the people token? Like, is there a let's go buy some other document, or what's happening there?
In the days after we made a decision to wind down the project, a couple of things happened. There immediately became this splintering of other DAOs and related DAOs, and they kind of splintered and then sometimes recoalesced. And so there is another DAO called, I believe it's called the People DAO, which basically is people who are supporters of the people token and want to use it, implement it, integrate it into other projects in different ways. There's an NFT project that they're putting together. And this is a mishmash of people that might have been contributors to the project. There's a couple mods that are involved in it. But by and large, it's really not the core team members. The core team members kind of, I think, really appreciated this certain sense of purity of the project of, hey, this was a nice, clean, fair token issuance. We didn't allocate things for ourselves. We're going to wind down nice and clean and fair. And at the end of this, we actually took our contract, the Juicebox contract, and sent it to a null address, effectively revoking ownership. So actually saying that we, even if we wanted to be bad actors and create additional tokens or mess with the supply or issue new things, we literally can't do that anymore. The actual contract address is now owned by OX000 1786, which is the year of the Constitution. So it's now at this point completely out of the core team's hands. Now, these other DAOs do have ideas for it and are attempting to raise money, I think, in the form of both Ether as well as people tokens. And they're currently sussing out what is it that we'd like to be able to do with it. And it's a curious task. And I think they're running into some of the same challenges that we had, which was, hey, if we don't have a treasury to fund and back this, how is that we motivate people to continue to build? And so it is this kind of interesting experiment in governance for something that you don't have something to back. And actually, I mean, that might be something kind of similar that people discuss with, for example, the Bitcoin world, that people might say, hey, we'd love to see more development in the Lightning Network, and we'd love to encourage developers to work on some of these things. But if you don't have a solid chunk of money to fund that, how does it happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting, right? Because one of the things that it experiments with is kind of like this really burning, short-lived kind of feeling of purpose, right? So there's this kind of like, because when you think about the idea of coordination, right, there's really kind of like a range of rigidity and a range of kind of flexibility, right? And so in a sense, like you can have a purpose that's very kind of broad as a purpose, and then that broad purpose can really be subject to kind of mutability, and people can argue about what we're doing, like in a sense, when you look at the longevity of the United States, I think we're doing pretty well. We're certainly north of a couple hundred years and some change. So, like I think the country has evolved, right? And there's certain kinds of constitution improvement proposals that I think people can kind of really feel proud of, right? Like I think, the 19th Amendment that gives voting rights to women, at 1920, right?
Right.
It took long enough, but and then the idea that amendment also kind of extends voting rights to like all citizens, like that's all, so when you think about these amendments, they really represent the kind of fluidity and flexibility and the ability to perform improvement, right? But the thing that's funny about what you built is, in a sense, like everyone was very radically unified around a very singular mission, right? But the mission was pretty narrow, right? And it was pretty temporal. So.
Yeah. And I think that part of it was the necessary haste of the project to a certain degree prevented us from establishing some of those kind of foundational parts that would have allowed us a greater degree of continuity. One of the other comments that we'd received from kind of legal advice had just been, hey, you'd been communicating one very explicit, clear goal from the onset. If from the onset you'd said, hey, and if we lose, we're definitely doing this and we're definitely doing that, then you also would have changed the dynamics a little bit, where you basically just raised a treasury with a broader perspective. Now, honestly, I think if we'd provided that type of broader vision, and we'd basically been hedging, like, oh, well, if we lose, we'll do this thing, I'm not sure people would have believed in it. I think that part of the tunnel vision focus is part of what people kind of got some folks so excited about it. But we could have done a better job with messaging. I mean, in fact, there's a handful of, I think, very fair critiques and criticisms that we received through the process. Some of them fair, some of them kind of unjustified. Like, for example, some folks in the general community kind of said, "Oh, this is a very centralized team." In some ways, yes, it had to be. We had 1 week to execute a set of very complex processes, from building and launching a smart contract and establishing the proper legal structure to allow Sotheby's to get comfortable with us entering the auction. So there's a fair degree of necessity of centralization, and then eventually the goal would be gradual and progressive decentralization. Ironically, on the other side of things, some of our partners, like Sotheby's, expressed frustration through the process that we were actually too decentralized, and they're on this email chain with 4 and 5 people, and who's the one decision maker, and who's the one person I can contact. And so there's kind of this funny crossover too between those two worlds of you're never going to satisfy each of them. One of the other criticisms was about gas fees. This is something that I actually do feel bad about, that if you were a small contributor, say donating just $200 or so, your money got eaten up by gas fees. And that's one of the unfortunate aspects of Ethereum network having just such high demand, and it being such a popular space, and it being so competitive to get block space, is that you're going to have really high gas fees. Now, if we had additional time and had the ability to build additional tooling, perhaps we would have done it on Polygon or somewhere else. But in 1 week, the tooling that existed and the platform we chose to go with, for example, Juicebox, basically said, hey, we're going to be doing this on mainnet. So that was one other, I'd say, fair criticism. I think it's unfortunate, though, that I think a lot of people outside the crypto world just saw, oh my God, these transaction fees, and they started pointing it to this aspect of, see, these cryptocurrency stuff can't work. See how much you're paying in transaction fees, and we're like, that's not quite the point that we were trying to convey. But I will say there was a lot of other very positive things that came from the kind of the outside kind of perspective and outside world. So first of all, one of the details I forgot to mention was that the proceeds of the auction went to the Dorothy Tepper Goldman Foundation. And Dorothy Tepper Goldman was the previous owner of the Constitution, and she was putting all the proceeds towards a constitutional education foundation. And so we feel very good about the fact that our participation likely drove up the price fairly substantially, based off of most professionals' estimates. And so we helped raise an awful lot more money for a very great charitable cause. So I was like, wow, I can feel pretty great about this. Two, the initial plans for the Constitution are still to put it into a publicly visible museum. Ken Griffin, the CEO of Citadel, who ended up winning the auction, who I kind of first got more famous on the internet back in February, March with GameStop and that entire ordeal. So it's kind of coming full circle. There's a lot of crossover of people on the internet who saw him both then and both now. And so he said, that he was interested in putting it in a museum in Arkansas. And so I do think there's something very cool too about Middle America being able to see and witness and interact with this very historic document, when in reality all the other copies are out on the East Coast. So there's a huge type of value in that.
Has Ken Griffin showed any interest at all in engaging with the story of ConstitutionDAO or with any of the participants?
Yes, this is actually a little bit of the drama that happened post facto. So right in the middle of a lot of this craziness of, oh gosh, people are mad about this, and now we've said that we are winding down and the token will not have proper issuance. Also, Miko, I should say, you're one of the first people who are hearing this very publicly, that it hasn't been super discussed publicly.
Sure.
One of the people from Ken's network had reached out to us and basically said, hey, we'd like to talk. And we didn't have a whole lot of context for what to talk about. But, there was, the initial proposal was something along the lines of, hey, would you be interested in the digital ownership? I presume to mean, to allow us to create, an NFT of it of some sort. And then there was, we had ideated briefly about, hey, would there be some opportunity to actually allow him to create a short list of institutions, and maybe potentially including Federal Hall, that we could actually give the document to and allow token holders to still vote and have a sense of governance of it still, nonetheless. The problem with this at this point was we now said, hey, we're winding down our project and your tokens no longer have value, so if you want to redeem it, go ahead and redeem it. So now if we'd gone back to people and said, actually,
sure,
you now have a utility behind this token, I think there would have been massive backlash. And there would have been a lot of people who said, oh my God, you told us that this token doesn't have any value, doesn't have any purpose. What are we supposed to be doing with it? And additionally, admittedly, there's a lot of core team members who couldn't get comfortable with the idea of working with Ken Griffin. Some folks had some negative sentiment towards him and said that they wouldn't want the idea of collaborating and working with him and wouldn't want to do that. And so that definitely played a role in it as well. All of this then came to a head maybe 2 weeks later. Bloomberg published this article kind of saying that, giving some additional details about Ken's bidding process, that Ken had actually heard about the auction first through his son. His son had heard about it because of the media that ConstitutionDAO was kicking up, and his son said, Dad, you should buy the Constitution. And Ken got in his head of, I'm going to buy this. I'm going to own it. And that's kind of how he was quoted in the article. The other part, though, was somewhere in the article, he says that he had been in communication with us before the auction, which, as far as I'm aware of, is not true. And he might have misspoke. But either way, there's a lot of people from the core team who very quickly checked with everyone and said, did you talk to him? Did you talk to him? No. And so there's a lot of folks who got very mad. And then we sent out a bunch of messages. And you know how Twitter can be, right? Very quickly it was like, oh, this is BS, whatever, this isn't true. But that only goes so far and only matters so much. And Bloomberg corrected the article and revised what they had said. Although there was also frustration that rather than announcing their mistake that they had misreported, they just kind of did it and just kind of hush did it. Which, I mean, that happens. There's nothing you can do about that. But so that was, I guess, some of the communication that did happen afterwards. Yeah.
No, it's truly great, right? Because one of the things that's so fascinating are how these kind of cataclysmic events, these moments in kind of history, the creation of the history, so if you go back to the history of the blockchain and the history of Ethereum, you have these sort of seismic moments like the DAO hack and the launch of CryptoKitties, and you have these kind of, so to me, like even things that are kind of lesser, like the Yam apocalypse and the DeFi,
Right.
and so like there's a
Yeah.
lot of these kind of funny little narratives that kind of help frame the kind of boundaries of the enterprise, and really kind of help the community organize their thoughts around kind of how does all of this work, So I
Yeah.
think to me, like, I think it's great. It's been really great to have you on. I think it's great. To me, like a lot of what my community is always wanting to sort of get is sort of the face and get the feeling about people and understand where they're coming from, and I think in a way, like, I don't, I'm a non-judgmental guy, so for me, like, I feel like everyone should just do that for themselves, right? Everyone should just look at the people and be like, do I like this person? Do I trust this person? Like,
Yeah.
where do I think they're coming from? And I think
Totally.
that's an individual decision, but I think to me, like, it's really a contribution to kind of progress the state of the art of governance, coordination, and really kind of create these almost like a special purpose vehicle in blockchain, so it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. The SPV analogy is pretty interesting because there's actually a lot of almost identical one-to-one analogies there
Yep.
about how these mechanisms actually work. And some of my thought process kind of on the onset, I've worked in the private equity world and we deal with SPACs, right? And so it was like, wow, this is actually like almost an exact correlation, right? If you don't like the deal, people don't know this on SPACs. You can actually redeem your shares, get back your par
Yep.
value, usually set at $10. And it was basically kind of functionally the same. But I mean, on the whole, I think more glad than anything that we onboarded a huge number of people to the Web3 world for the first time. Some of the estimates from groups out there was range across the board, but up to 50% of the contributors being basically new to Web3 for the first time, and thinking that, hey, like, we actually helped just bring people in this community to talk about what is a DAO, what does it mean to decentralize. What does it mean to have shared governance, and what's the nuances of why this had to be a donation as opposed to why aren't we allowed to use the term ownership for this document, and how's that play into laws and regulations, and the broader conversation then about what's the current state of regulation in and around crypto. I like the fact that we also pioneered something in the project to say that, like, we're not just a bunch of faces hidden. We were very willing to put ourselves out there and say, hey, I'm attaching my name and my reputation to this. We don't have anything to hide here. This isn't some scam. This is, we're willing to just put ourselves out there. And I think I think a lot of folks who looked at it afterwards and went, wow, like, that adds something to it. And I think that hopefully it brings more and more transparency to the space too.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I really admire how you've done this, and I think it advances the cause quite a lot in many, many really unique ways. So, really appreciate it, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Miko. Really appreciate it. Fantastic,
Okay.
man.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.